Welcome, everyone. My name is Pascaline Dupas. I'm the faculty director here at the King Center on Global Development and also the Klein-Heinz Family Professor of International Studies in the Economics Department. We are very excited to have you today for this event. Before I jump into telling you more about the topic of today's event, we're going to say a little bit about the center. We always have to share what we do. Our mission is to help improve the lives of people living in poverty around the world. And how we do that, we have three main pillars in what we do. First, we support research that aims to inform policy and practice on critical development issues. Number two, we help train the next generation of thinkers and leaders in global development. We have, in particular, a pre-doc program that we are very excited about. Number three, we foster conversation such as this one on important issues in global development or about important actors in global development. And so today we're going to be talking about BRAC in particular and its programs that have focused on approaches to women's empowerment in global development. Today we're going to talk about the power of hope. We are going to talk about the work of BRAC, an organization that has been working on many ways to improve women's outcome around the world. And as an academic institution, we are particularly grateful and glad for BRAC's work because BRAC has been a key actor and partner in research. Okay, so a number of our students are or have been working with BRAC, and that's something that we want to talk about today. Both, the power of hope for participants in BRAC's programs, but also the power of hope for the fate of global development going forward if more and more of the programs are put to the test and rigorously evaluated, such as the ones that BRAC have been putting together. The occasion for this event is a new book celebrating the life of Sir Fazle Abed, the founder of BRAC, who believed in the science of hope. He believed that boosting hope and self-confidence is a critical means to help end poverty, and that was not just a belief based on the top of his head, but on rigorous evidence that have come forward suggesting that this is indeed the case, that giving people hope for the future combined with other support is a very good way to change outcomes in their lives. So as BRAC has grown beyond its origins in Bangladesh, it continues to partner with researchers to evaluate how its existing programs can translate into new contexts, and they also continue testing new programs. And so I'm very much looking forward to discussing this learning agenda and situating it in its historical context with our panelists from BRAC and from academia this afternoon. So today we have the pleasure first to have the son of Sir Fazle Abed, Shamran Abed, who's going to be joining us virtually on Zoom from Dhaka. Okay, so he's going to show up at some point. I don't think he's right there right now, but very soon he's going to show up. Shamran is the executive director of BRAC International. Just FYI, it's like 5 a.m. in Dhaka. Okay, so we are all the more grateful that he's joining us. And he joined BRAC Bangladesh in 2009 and BRAC International in 2012. And he's been instrumental in bringing BRAC's flagship programs of microfinance and ultra-poor graduation to global scale. Shamran is also the chairman of the Microfinance Network and is a member of the steering committee of the Partnership for Economic Inclusion at the World Bank. And in the room with us, we have Scott McMillan, who is the Director of Learning and Innovation for BRAC USA. Scott is also a former journalist who served as a speechwriter for Sir Abed prior to his death in 2019. And so he's the author of the new biography of Sir Abed entitled Hope Over Fate, Fazle Hasan Abed and the Science of Ending Global Poverty. And we're very lucky that you're going to share with us an excerpt of the book. And for those of you who didn't get to get a signed copy yet, there were some at the front. Maybe if you quickly go out, you can get one and get it signed later. And we also have Manisha Shah with us tonight, who is a Franklin Gilliam Jr. Endowed Chair in Social Justice and a Professor of Public Policy at the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs. so many big names. Manisha, thank you for being here. She already gave us a talk yesterday in the economics department on a program with BRAC. So And we also had a student yesterday who presented some work with BRAC. So it's been a BRAC fest here around the economics department. Manisha is a development economist whose primary research and teaching lies at the intersection of applied microeconomics, health, and development. She will talk to us about a recent study she completed with BRAC in Uganda and about this partnership between the organization and the researchers and how this learning agenda is going to be used to improve program implementations and outcomes down the road. So the event is going to go as follows. We're going to start with a short video that BRAC put together that provides an introduction to their founder's philosophy. Then we'll hear from Scott, an excerpt from the book, and then a presentation from Manisha on our work with BRAC. And then we'll have a discussion. I'll kick it off with a couple of questions and then I'll open it to the audience. All right? Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Let's get going on the video.
He's been called one of the unsung heroes of modern times. Fazle Hasan Abed was more than just a mild-mannered accountant. As a young man in the early 1970s, he had a corporate multinational job in finance. He could have stayed on that career path and led a very comfortable life. Instead, in 1972, confronted with war and natural disaster in his homeland, he quit his job and founded BRAC, originally the Bangladesh Rehabilitation Assistance Committee.
People died because they were poor. And I thought that the kind of life I was leading at the time, working for Shell Oil, I thought that this life is not really something that I'd like to pursue. I'd like to pursue something else.
In the decades to come, BRAC would become massive, reaching 100 million people in Asia and Africa. It is known as one of the world's most effective anti-poverty efforts. Abed avoided the limelight. He preferred to let his work speak for itself. Microfinance, community healthcare, education, humanitarian aid, and more. What links these diverse programs together is Abed's lifelong conviction that hope itself can help people overcome poverty. He saw that poverty was not just a lack of money or skills. People remained trapped in poverty, in part because they thought things could never change. They thought it was their fate to be poor. So Abed started by changing this mindset. He gathered people in small groups to talk about their problems so that together they could confront the injustices that held them back. They began to understand that a better world was possible, and that they themselves had the power to build it. This is the power of hope. Millions of people planning for the future, saving and investing, girls filling up classrooms, women starting their own businesses. BRAC is known for its entrepreneurial approach to tackling poverty. It is known for being efficient and effective, but it is far more than that. The legacy of Fazle Hasan Abed is the triumph of hope over fate.
When life is for a short period on Earth, and I would like that short period that each of us have to be as happy and as productive and as meaningful as possible.
Thank you. In 2011, I joined the BRAC family of organizations, and I'm not going to go into the story of how I ended up joining. I was a freelance journalist. I ended up spending many hours listening to the founder, Sir Fazle Abed, tell me stories from the previous 8 decades of his life. The book that I've written, I like to believe, okay, it's a biography, yes. It is a biography of a man that I believe is a remarkable man, and one of the unsung heroes of modern times, in the words of Nick Kristof of the New York Times. It's also the biography of an idea, and it is this idea of the power of hope. It is the subject of a lot of recent economic research. Thank you, Manisha. and others. We'll be talking about that later. I also understood over time that it was the driving conviction of Abed's life going back to the 1970s. So I'm just going to share one story from the book. The year is 1974. The location is a remote part of northern Bangladesh, and a young accountant by the name of Fazle Abed, with no prior experience in relief or aid, has already spent the last couple of years working with the people here. The poverty is grinding, and he's already faced several big setbacks. But he's recently begun experimenting with a new way of teaching basic skills like literacy and numeracy. This technique, it relies on dialogue and discussion, and it is based on the work, the methodologies of a Brazilian educator by the name of Paulo Freire. It starts by gathering people in an open space in the village in front of just a poster, a single sheet of paper based on a single word. So picture it here. One word, home. Bari, B-A-R-I in the Bangla language. So the word is written, but because most people can't read or write, there's also a very simple drawing of a house. So why is the home important? The teacher would ask, pointing to the image. And the villagers would point out that the word signifies more than just a dwelling. It's, in the words of Bob Dylan, it's not a house, it's a home. It includes children, spouses, livestock. It's really more like a homestead. It's the patch of land surrounding the hut. And as the discussions get underway, the people get, the discussions get quite animated. Some people's homes are bigger than others, one person might say. Or during stormy nights, it just rains right through my thatched roof and I can't afford to fix it. Okay, next day. Another day, another word. This time it's tiger. So what does the tiger represent? I mean, every Bengali person knows what a tiger is, even if they haven't been to the zoo to see one. Let's play it right. Tiger. What does the tiger mean? Somebody just shout out. Tiger. What does it represent? Power. Is a tiger nice if you run into one in the jungle? Right? It's kind of it's wildness. It's fierce. It is the untamed state of nature, if you will. If you see one, go the other way. The teacher is now acting more like a facilitator and will ask, okay, can a tiger build a house? And of course, the people say, no, a tiger can't build a house. If it rains, what does he do? He can just run under a tree. Can you build a house? Of course, the villagers reply, and they start to discuss it, right? If we have access to the tools and the materials, we can all build houses for ourselves. And then the teacher says this: human beings are therefore different from the tiger because we can adapt nature to suit our own needs, where the tiger can only adapt himself to nature. We don't wander around from place to place anymore. We choose to plant seeds and till the soil so we can stay put. That is our choice. And this process of changing nature to suit the needs of human beings through their own creative activities is called the process of civilization itself, and it is humans alone who engage in it. The tiger can't plan ahead. He can't build a boat to go to another village when the floods come. 100 tigers cooperating with one another still cannot build a house. In the words of Paulo Freire, the tiger exists in an overwhelming present. No sense of the future, no planning, no dreaming, no sense of today or tomorrow, no history, no development. Men and women acting together, unlike the tiger, can do many, many things. So can each of you discuss a few of the creative things that you've done today, the teacher asks. And one person might have planted seeds or harvested rice. Another person might say, well, I actually repaired the the thatch on my roof so it doesn't, rain onto my bed in the middle of the night. Perhaps somebody worked on a flood wall to direct the flow of rainwater so it would irrigate the fields properly. And the point starts to become clear. They had already contributed to the building of a civilized life. Society was theirs to own and to shape, not something given to them. And acting collectively, they could do much, much more. Poverty had been made by human beings, and it could be unmade by them too. This was the first lesson, and the first basic lesson in human consciousness. The effect on the villagers, as Abed told me this story, was quite remarkable because they began to question their situation. They began to imagine a better future. They began to think constructively about how they could bring it about. Now, the road ahead would be long. It would be very long. And you can't buy a loaf of bread just with hope alone or critical thinking. It would not be enough to encourage critical thinking, access to essential services, such as credit, such as healthcare, affordable or accessible education for the children. All of these would still be needed. But none of this would mean a thing if the people did not first believe in the possibility of change. And as Abed told me the story, it was as though the first sparks of self-worth and hope had been lit. And once these flames were burning, they would be very, very difficult to extinguish. And I remember him telling me that story for the first time, and I thought, somebody ought to write a book about that. So here we are. Thank you.
So thank you so much for the invitation to be here, and thanks, Pascaline, for putting the boring academic after the amazing storytelling journalist. My name is Manisha Shah, and I'm an economist by training, and I'm a professor at UCLA. And just to give you a little background, I guess, of why I'm here today, I was trying to think about if I had to sort of sum up my own personal research agenda in one sentence of kind of what I've spent the last 20 years thinking about. My research agenda is probably driven by the question of how we can improve the plight of low-income women, adolescents, and children across the globe, whether that be through public policy or through interventions on the ground by organizations like BRAC. So BRAC is a very unique organization for many reasons, but one of the reasons that they are unique, in my opinion, is their huge and heavy amount of engagement with professors like myself, with researchers at research institutes, with international organizations like the World Bank. They have a huge learning agenda. And they're very committed to this learning agenda. And I can say this because I've collaborated with many, many organizations. And BRAC, BRAC is very committed to actually improving their programming and learning about what they're doing and learning how to do it better. And so BRAC actively collaborates with researchers like myself. My relationship with them actually dates back to 2014. When we started talking about the ELA program. So this is a picture that was taken in Tanzania where I've done a lot of work with them. Some of you may be wondering what exactly is ELA. So ELA stands for Empowerment and Livelihood for Adolescents. And this is a program that BRAC started in Bangladesh and is now being implemented all over Africa in Uganda, Tanzania, Sudan, Sierra Leone. And the idea behind this program is it's sort of a safe space for girls to get together in the afternoon hours. And so you'll find young women ages 11 to 22 in these clubs, and they're having a lot of fun. I hope this picture shows you, they play games, they sing, they dance, they do theater, but while they're engaging in these activities, they're also learning about life skills. And so here, when I talk about life skills, what I mean is they're learning about things like adolescence and reproductive health and menstruation and what happens to your body when you get pregnant. What does a healthy relationship with a boy look like? There's a lot of kind of building of confidence and sort of helping them navigate this transition to womanhood. And there's also, for the kind of the older girls who participate in the program, the 18 plus, there's also access to income generating opportunities and microfinance. And so back in the day, BRAC was interested in learning about the impacts of this program, ELA, and this was actually before my relationship with them started. And so they were doing randomized controlled trials of ELA in Uganda, Sierra Leone, and Tanzania. And the kind of findings from the randomized controlled trials came out, and they were finding amazing and really interesting positive impacts coming out of Uganda, coming out of Sierra Leone, but a very similar RCT in Tanzania wasn't finding as much. And so part of why we started engaging was because they were interested in understanding what was going on in Tanzania, right? Why weren't we observing the same positive impacts in Tanzania that we were in Uganda? And so that was really how our relationship began. I was interested in researching certain types of interventions that I'll tell you about in a minute, and BRAC was interested in improving their programming. And so they basically gave me 3 constraints, which was, sure, come do research with us, but all of these kind of interventions that you're thinking about, they need to be low cost so that we can continue to implement them if they're effective after you leave. They need to be scalable, right? Because BRAC works, we worked in 150 communities in Tanzania, but they were sort of working in even more than that, and easy to implement, right? So that after the researchers leave, they can continue doing the work. And so the goal for them was improving their programming. The goal, for myself as a researcher was to think about, what might interventions look like that improve sexual and reproductive health outcomes for adolescents in sub-Saharan Africa, okay? With the sort of underlying issue that a lot of sexual and reproductive health outcomes for adolescents, honestly anywhere in the world, this isn't just in sub-Saharan Africa, involve really important underlying power dynamics, right? Between boys and girls, between males and females. And in many parts of the world, and again, I would probably argue everywhere in the world, social norms, lack of bargaining power of young women may actually limit these females' abilities to make safe sexual choices for themselves. Okay, and so what we did, I have 10 minutes, so I'm not going to be able to tell you about everything we did, but we basically implemented a large randomized controlled trial because this was part of a learning agenda, right? And so we implemented various interventions in randomly selected communities where BRAC was already working, where these ELA clubs existed. And the intervention that I want to talk to you about today, or just highlight, where we found some really interesting findings, is that in 50 of the communities, we went in and sort of at baseline, we asked all of the girls in the ELA clubs that BRAC was working in, we said, hey, tell us who you're currently dating. Who are your boyfriends? And if the girls didn't have boyfriends, we sort of asked in that adolescent way, like, who are the boys that you like right now? And so in these 50 communities, we invited these boys, there were about 1,000 of them, to participate in an intervention run by grassroots soccer. And so what grassroots soccer does is very similar work to kind of what the ELA program does with young women, but they're doing this with young men. And so they get boys ages 10 to 19 together on a soccer pitch. So this is a picture taken by my co-author when she was visiting Iringa. And this is a kind of 11-week program where boys get together once a week, they play soccer, but while they're playing soccer, they're also learning about risk behavior and the use of contraceptives, and they learn about respecting girls and intimate partner violence. And this is an example of one of their days. If you show up at the soccer pitch, this is an example where the coaches set up cones. Sorry, I don't know if you can read this, but there's 4 cones on the soccer pitch. Each cone represents a risk behavior, right? So the first cone is unprotected sex. The second cone is multiple partners. The third cone is, mixing sex with alcohol, et cetera, et cetera. And the exercise here is that they have to kick the ball around the cone and not actually touch the cone to learn this message that that's that's a risk behavior, right? You kind of want to stay away from engaging in those types of activities. Every practice has these key messages. So I've just given you some examples of, key messages, like in life, we should all stand up for girls and women to protect them from abuse. Another key message, build your team with strong supporters that help you abstain from sex or to practice safe sexual behaviors using condoms, okay? So the thing that I want to highlight is what we learned from this. And so just to give you an idea, we went in at baseline, we collected data on all of our girls in these ELA clubs. 2 years go by, and during these 2 years, all of our interventions are happening. When we come back 2 years later in these communities where we were also working with our young men and boys, what we're learning is that including males in this soccer programming decreases female reports of intimate partner violence by about 0.2 standard deviation. And so girls in these communities are reporting that they're experiencing less IPV often, they're experiencing less IPV in the last year. And so just sort of this idea of working with boys is improving female outcomes related to intimate partner violence. And so why does this matter? Well, this is a heat map that we generated, and what this heat map shows you is this is the prevalence of intimate partner violence across the globe. And you'll see, the darker blue are places where prevalence is worse, but even in kind of places where prevalence isn't that bad, prevalence ranges anywhere from 16% to 66%. Okay, so these are just really, really high rates of IPV. The global number that we often hear about is that 1 in 3 women will experience IPV. And so if you just look around this room, right, 1 in 3 women, that's a lot of women. We now have studies showing that the economic costs of this type of IPV range anywhere from 1 to 4% of global GDP. There's many, many micro-studies now documenting negative impacts of experiencing IPV, whether that be related to kind of physical health impacts, mental health impacts, lower female labor force participation, lower rate household consumption, lower income. There's also negative impacts of children whose mothers experience IPV, worse child health, lower educational attainment. The thing we still don't know that much about, though, is how to reduce IPV, right? So there's very little causal evidence out there about interventions and policies that actually reduce the high prevalence of intimate partner violence that I've shown you. And so one of the exciting things I think about this study is that we have some now, right? In these communities where we were also working with these boys to try and shift some of these norms around violence, we've seen decreases. So let me end now with just talking a little about what BRAC is doing, and then we can go into some Q&A. But I think one of the exciting things for me is that BRAC is now definitely doing more work with boys and thinking about working more with boys. And in terms of the ELA program I told you about, we're actually now working in Uganda to figure out how to scale up ELA into ELAS, which is this idea of working with the Ministry of Education and actually bringing ELA into secondary schools. And so more adolescents can be exposed to the programming. And I'm hoping to be the one who actually evaluates all of that work via a randomized controlled trial. So hopefully there will be more learnings from that study. Thank you.
We saw a little video about your father to start, and we heard about this idea that he has dear to his heart about the power of hope. So I just wanted to ask you first, what was it growing up with your dad? Is this an idea that was around all the time that you actually agree with, or do you have some caveat that you want to put around these thoughts? What's your own view on this?
Yeah, thank you very much, Pascaline. I hope you all can hear me. I can't unfortunately see you, but it's great to be here this afternoon or evening for you. It's early in the morning, but it's not so early, so it's not so bad. It's about 6:30 a.m. now, so it's absolutely fine. I was actually hoping to be there in person, but unfortunately I had to change my plans a little bit because of something else that was going on here. So I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person, but again, it's really great to be with all of you today. So to your question about growing up with him, yeah, these days I'm starting to get asked that quite a bit. And I think what I'd say is, obviously he was a very busy man. He was very, very committed to the work he was doing. And in our family, we used to say that BRAC was our eldest sibling. I was his first child. BRAC is exactly about 10 years older than I am. Sorry, 9 years older than I am. And I have an older sister who is 7 years older than I am. So I was the baby in the family. But the other thing to say is, by the time I came around and was old enough to know what was going on, BRAC was already quite well established. It was already sort of 15, 16 years old. I guess I would suppose by the time I was aware of this, of what my father was doing. And from a very early age, I think we knew, and I can't tell you exactly how we knew, but we knew that the work that my father was doing was very important and meaningful. And I think that from a very early age gave us a great sense of pride. My age difference with my father was quite a lot. It was 45 years. So, he was already in his early 50s by the time I can remember, and quite well established. So by that point, he was, we had a sense of what he was doing. So that was one thing. But the other thing was that, my father was very good at sort of being in the present. So he was busy a lot. He was away a lot, traveling all over the world at the time, trying to raise money for BRAC's work, going and representing the organization in different conferences and seminars and forums. But what he had was, when he was at home, when he'd come home from work in the evening or over the weekends when he was home, he was very present and very available for us, his kids. So even though he wasn't there a lot, but when he was there, we got a lot of his attention. We got his undivided attention, and that made a huge difference for us. We didn't feel that he was so distracted that we were talking to him and he wasn't listening, and that made a big difference. So that's what I would say. I mean, growing up, we didn't see him a lot, but we were aware of what he was doing, and we were proud of the fact that his work was very meaningful. But also we felt that, when we needed him and when he was around, he was there 100%. And that made, I think, a big difference on both my sister and I. And of course, growing up with BRAC obviously had a big impact on us, because we both ended up, after trying a few different things, joining BRAC, in the end. So I guess, it had a big impact from us from a very early age. Thank you.
Okay. So quickly, another question. You're managing the BRAC's operations outside of Bangladesh. And I wanted to ask about this transition, moving out of Bangladesh, knowing how many differences there are across different parts of the world in terms of women's conditions in particular. How did you deal with this, like moving to a new context, especially a lot of countries in sub-Saharan Africa? How much of the lessons could carry over? How much of the research agenda, learning agenda was part of that move? Did you initially think, okay, we can just start something and it's all going to work because we know it works in Bangladesh? Or were you from the very beginning open to the idea that you may need to try different things? We already heard from Manisha that the same ELA program worked in 2 countries, but not in a third one. So how have you been thinking about expansion within this learning agenda?
Yeah, so first thing I would say is, it was a big deal for BRAC to start working outside Bangladesh. So, and I've said this before as well, if you're an organization from the global south, and especially a country like Bangladesh, which for most of its history was internationally known as a basket case because we were so poor, that when you grow out of a context like that, you don't think about solving the world's problems. You think about doing things in your own context in your own country. So if you look at global brands in the world today that you all know of, how many brands do you know that come from the global south? You don't know of many, because there aren't many. It's the brands, it's the organizations out of the US, North America, or Europe that actually that go global and have global presence and global distribution, because it's very natural for an organization or a company in America or Europe to think we need to conquer the world. But for us, an organization born out of Bangladesh, I mean, that was a big decision that BRAC made about 20 years ago now, that BRAC would work outside the boundaries of Bangladesh. I think it was a very bold decision, and obviously there was a lot of backlash that, as you can probably imagine, even within Bangladesh, because there was a sense that BRAC felt that it had already done all it could in Bangladesh, but Bangladesh was still a very poor country, and still today is a developing country. So, that decision in itself was controversial, and raised a lot of passions within the organization, within the country. But I think for my father, it was very important, once he'd done 30 years of work in Bangladesh, that we could take some of that learning and some of that understanding of poverty, how to work with poor people. So, I mean, going back to Scott's presentation or excerpt, and the way BRAC worked was with the people and not, for the people, right? So in BRAC's sort of, at the essence of BRAC and the way it runs programs and the way it designs, there is this big sense that, we have to work with the people, and we have to create the enabling conditions for people to transform their own lives. So it's not that we would transform their lives or we will transform their lives. It's we have to create the conditions under which they can transform their own lives. And that's why, we talk about the power of hope, because the confidence, the self-worth, the hope, the being able to think about a future is very important for people. That makes a big difference. Having the opportunities, the resources, the assets, that's very important for people, because obviously you need that to be able to transform your life. So BRAC's, work and approach is to make sure that we create the enabling environment and that people get on their way. And I think that's something BRAC had worked on for 30 years. By the time it went outside, we proved that it works. We proved that we could scale it to nationwide scale and meet and access and reach millions of people and help millions of people transform their lives. So when that was already proven in Bangladesh, the idea was that we take the same learning and the same approach of working closely with communities to have impact at scale in other countries. And the first country we went to was Afghanistan. We grew in certain other countries in Asia, and then ultimately 2006 and 2007, we went into East Africa and then to West Africa. The experience has been, has been a mixed bag, I would say. I mean, I'm talking to, I think, university and academic audience, and I think, to be honest, have we been able to do it in other parts of the world what BRAC has managed to do in Bangladesh? Not yet. But we have scaled in most of the countries where we work. Some of our programs, like microfinance, has scaled very well. Our other programs are some of them are scaling, some of them are struggling to scale. A lot of that is, of course, also to do with the way that the donor funding flows work. Donors are becoming much more sort of about, more specific, shorter term projects, and BRAC is not really geared for that. We want to do longer term integrated holistic development. And we're trying to figure out how we meet somewhere where the donors also understand that, you're not going to transform people's lives through single interventions. There is no magic bullet. We can't run things for 2 years, 3 years, and then walk away from communities and expect that the community will be able to take it over and run with it for the rest of however long we need it to. So what we are trying to do now is, given all of our learning now for 50 years in Bangladesh and about 20 years working in all of these countries outside Bangladesh, is trying to tell our donors that if we want to have impact at scale and transform people's lives, we have to do things in a different way. And luckily, there are several funding partners out there who understand that and who are willing to support us. So I think the future for BRAC outside Bangladesh is that I think we're going to be able to scale our work. It's very clear to us that we have to hold on to our ethos and our values and keep working with the community to find solutions for big problems, which we know are there. And some of them we know already and we need to scale. And we don't want to get into the typical sort of development sort of rigmarole or game where we just respond to calls and put in proposals and get projects and run projects and the project ends. There is a place for that, and of course we continue to do some of that as well. But we want to be a lot more strategic. Really make people understand that we have a deeper understanding of poverty because of where we come from and what we've worked on for so many years. We've now worked in many contexts, and we need to really leverage that to have impact at scale. So that's the plan for BRAC outside Bangladesh, and we're well on our way, I think.
Okay, thanks so much. I have a question for you, Scott. You mentioned we can adapt nature to suit our own needs, and you said that's your definition of civilization. When I hear that right now, we can adapt nature to suit our own needs, I think climate change. I think we are, actually not suiting the needs of the future generations. And in particular, when I think about Bangladesh and the fact that there are coastal areas where, millions of particularly poor people live are going to be affected by the risk of flooding, even more so going forward, I'm thinking, where's the hope, Isn't fate starting to look a little bit bigger and hope starting to shrink? And to what extent is this affecting BRAC's programming? Like, to what extent are you trying to work towards maybe ensuring that people are going to be equipped to deal with this better? And in the book, you mentioned when Sir Fazle Abed was in this island that had been devastated by a cyclone back in the 70s, and he realized, well, if they had had better dwellings, they could have withstood the cyclone, but they were living in thatched roofed homes, so there was no chance. And so this idea that maybe by accelerating the pace of poverty alleviation, we can make sure that more people are better prepared to deal with climate change. Is that part of the strategy going forward for BRAC?
Thank you for answering the question. Okay, it's funny. I'm sometimes asked this question about Bangladesh, and it was fun. Oddly enough, it was a few years ago. It was the former Secretary Treasury, Robert Rubin, was like, we were at a table, and I was just some guy representing BRAC USA, and we all went around the room and introduced ourselves. And afterwards he turned to me and said, why aren't the Bangladeshis like terrified, or aren't the Bangladeshis like terrified about the impact of climate change? First of all, I just was remarkable that he would ask me a question, right? I thought that was a mark of an intelligent person. He just sort of like scanned the room and thought like, that person knows something that I don't know, right? The Bangladesh is ground zero for climate change, yes. Bangladesh is also ground zero for climate change adaptation. And if you see the changes that that climate change is causing in Bangladesh, you're really seeing an acceleration, largely, not only, but largely, an acceleration or an amplification of issues and problems that have existed for a very long time. And that, some of the issues are just geographic. They have existed ever since, people were living on land. What is Bangladesh? Bangladesh is a flood-prone patch of land the size of Iowa that is defined by these mighty rivers like the Brahmaputra and the Ganges, making their final few hundred miles to the sea, right? And they sort of break up and they spread out in these, tributaries and distributaries. And the land is exceptionally fertile in many places, but life is also exceptionally uncertain. So this idea of the rising salinity of the soil, for instance, which is one of the indicators of climate change that we actually see. It's not like, it's not like the water is like coming up to people's ankles and then their calves or anything like that, but we do see changes in the salinity of the soil in arable land, for instance. You see changes that you see accelerated urbanization, right? Now, of course, there's no counterfactual, so you can't really say like, well, what would have happened in the absence of climate change? But you do see, people that are struggling in many cases, but you also see them using the resilience that has sort of been built up over generations. And what we need to do is, exactly what I think we need to turn back. We need to go back to, hope over fate. We need to basically, exactly what you said, make sure that, that people have the ability to adapt nature to suit their own needs rather than letting it get away from them and as you said, fate taking over. So that, I mean, that happens in a myriad of ways. You know, some of them are scientific. You see a lot of development of saline-resistant rice varieties, for instance. Some of it is just support for migrants coming into the cities, and it's a question of taking solutions that have already worked in rural areas and adapting them to urban areas. For instance, the graduation program, which is a program that BRAC has developed to lift people or graduate people from a state of extreme destitution into a sustainable livelihood so they can finally be in a situation where they've broken the poverty trap and their work finally gains traction. If you can do that in rural areas, which BRAC has done, you can do it in urban areas as well with a few tweaks. At the basic, you know, and I think that the reason BRAC has been successful at these types of interventions where others have failed is because of this focus on addressing, as a starting point anyway, addressing this underlying sense of fatalism or despair. So I feel like I've danced around your question. I don't know, I never answer questions, but I say stuff in response to them. I hope that's
all right, I'm watching the clock. I want to make sure we have time for questions from the audience. But Manisha, very quickly, it seems like you had to work with grassroots soccer initially to get to work with the boys. Is it because BRAC initially was not interested in working with boys? They were like, we are girls, we don't do boys? Or was it more like, you know, grassroots soccer was already there, they were doing something, there was a chance it was already well developed, it made sense to learn from that, and now BRAC is going to take,
Right.
you know, incorporate that into their own programming?
Yeah, so no, grassroots soccer wasn't already there. We had a lot of discussion with BRAC about this, because here's the thing, the ELAP programs, in general, these are supposed to be safe spaces for boys, right? And I was kind of, I mean, sorry, for girls. And I was like, hey, let's bring boys and start working with them. And I think BRAC correctly was like, well, no, wait a minute. Part of this whole ELAP program, right, is that we target girls and young women, and this is a safe space for them to talk about topics that, you know, are related to issues and problems that they face. And I think, you know, and so, but at the same time, I think there was definitely interest from BRAC of like, how do we figure out ways where we can incorporate boys into programming or work with boys in these communities? And so I think in a way, this was kind of a good way of us like testing out something that I wanted to test out. You know, I'm someone who's worked kind of in gender my entire career, but like historically working on gender issues means working with like girls and women. And I've come to the realization recently that many of the problems that girls and women face involve boys and men. And so unless we like, you know, we need to start working with boys and men. And I think that piece of the agenda BRAC was very on board with, but it was more like figuring out how to do that in a way where the girls and women still felt safe and you know, their programming could continue.
Okay. Let me turn to the audience now. Any questions? We still have Shamran on Zoom, so you can also ask him a question. Okay, yes, please, if you want to introduce yourself. And I think there's a microphone. If
yeah, we'll need a microphone, otherwise Shamran won't be able to hear.
This is a question about the impact of BRAC in general, in Bangladesh specifically. So is there any measurement on, you know, how many millions of people they brought out of poverty, or what was the impact on GDP with their programs? I was just curious to know that.
do you hear the question, Shamran? Maybe that's one for you. When you know, what's the number you give when you want to gloat about the effect of BRAC, and what's the estimate that was a lower bound, I guess? So the question is, do you have an estimation of the number of lives that have been impacted and the impact on GDP?
Yeah, thanks. I think I heard it. So it's not very straightforward to answer that. I don't think we would have analysis of what percentage of what's the impact of BRAC on Bangladesh's GDP. I can give you some sense that, across a lot of economic and social indicators, BRAC's contribution to Bangladesh has been very significant, right? So, if you look at all the work that BRAC has done on reducing infant mortality, child mortality, maternal mortality over the course of 50 years, but more so in the first, let's say, 40 years, when the drastic reduction happened in all of those numbers in Bangladesh. I can't, it's hard to say exactly how much of that is attributable to BRAC, but I would imagine that it would be quite significant. BRAC's education program has put 17 million children through primary school. These are 17 million children who would not have been educated had it not been for BRAC's work. BRAC's microfinance program, serves 8 million women in Bangladesh. So that's 8 million families that get access to credit, access to savings, access to insurance, access to payment services, because of the fact that BRAC is out there in every rural, remote part of the country, providing these services. So those are just some examples in health, education, and microfinance. But if you look at BRAC's work across many other aspects as well, agriculture, value chains, gender equality and gender justice, it's quite profound. So what I would say is difficult to say exactly what the contribution to GDP is, or what the contribution to the reduction in maternal or child mortality, or life expectancy, or literacy rates, or gender parity in education. But BRAC has had a significant role to play in all of that. And I would say that if you look at Bangladesh's progress, from going from an international basket case, as we were categorized or characterized after independence 50 years ago, to where Bangladesh is now, it's obviously a very large country by population. I think right now we're the 8th largest with about 170 million people. It's a very small land mass, so we're one of the smallest countries. I mean, the density of population is very high, but even then, Bangladesh is, feeds itself. Bangladesh's GDP right now is getting to about $400 billion US in nominal terms, and by 2032 or 33, I think we're going to become $1 trillion economy, which there aren't that many of. So I think, and of course, some of these numbers now with the war and the prices and the energy and, the energy crisis and the food crisis, some of my numbers might be a bit off, because obviously there's been changes recently and because of COVID. But we are at this point, I think, the 41st largest economy in the world. And I think, we were supposed to become, in the next 10 to 15 years, the 28th largest economy in the world when we hit about $1.2 trillion economy. So, the country, the progress of Bangladesh is phenomenal. For me, growing up, in my 41 years of life, what I've seen from when I was a child, going with my father to the field and seeing the state in which people lived, and what I see now going out to the field and seeing the work that BRAC has done and others have done and the government has done, it is absolutely a different country. And I can't exactly tell you exactly how much, but BRAC's contribution would be quite profound.
I can add to that. There is a chapter in, I go into this in the book, in the chapter on the child survival program that BRAC ran in the 1980s. And this was BRAC's first effort to really go nationwide. And basically, BRAC sent teams out to visit 13 million mothers and teach them face-to-face, through door-to-door, face-to-face training, how to mix their own oral rehydration solution to cure often fatal children's diarrhea, which was the biggest killer of children under 5. Now, BRAC was actually quite shy at the time about making claims about the number of lives that had been saved. But you look at the recent studies, it is a very conservative estimate, I argue anyway, that there are hundreds of thousands of people alive today that would not be alive were it not for that campaign, which ranks as, it's still held up as a case study in mass behavior change. And it was Abed who really sat people down and said, we have to tackle this. Hundreds of thousands of lives saved. I'm going to punt on the GDP question as well, but I thought I would throw that out there.
Hi, I'm Ruth Levine from ID Insight. And, I'm curious about the partnerships with academics that, and other researchers that BRAC has had over the years. Certainly more successful than many other organizations, and it's been a bigger priority. So I'm curious about maybe what some of the lessons are that could inform those sorts of partnerships between nonprofit organizations that are delivering services, that are developing programs, and a very robust academic community and community of researchers who are interested in supporting that, the success of those programs. What are the lessons?
From BRAC's side, okay, I'm gonna answer it from BRAC's side, and I'm going to be brief. But I mean, the answer is it's transparency. It is acknowledging the value in recognizing failures. Manisha shared several statistics from several RCTs that were done in the Adolescent Girls Empowerment Program in Africa. And in many places, this was a huge success. In many places and in many times, it was a huge success. And sometimes it wasn't, right? And the ability to say, okay, what is actually going on here? What is going wrong? And who can we partner with that's going to have the credibility to tell the truth to us and explain not just the what, but the why. I think that has something to do with it. From the academic side, maybe Manisha can.
No, I agree with that, because there's been many organizations sort of similar to BRAC that I've partnered with over the years who they say they want you to evaluate their program, but then you go in and they're already sold that their program works, and they don't really want you to evaluate it. Like they're not sort of willing to go the whole way, because a lot of the work I do is randomized controlled trials, right? Which is long-term, it's expensive, it takes a lot of engagement, you have to be open to finding zero effects, and generally speaking, I sort of feel like BRAC has been very open, with letting us do the kind of research we need to do. And I do quantitative research, but I will tell you that BRAC also collaborates with lots of qualitative researchers as well, who are, out in the field, hanging out, like the other thing that I'm always amazed by, so when we started this project, I just sent a PhD student from UCLA to Tanzania, and he spent a few months. They're very open to students just showing up in their office and spending time there and talking to people that they're working with. And so this sort of transparency and openness and willingness to kind of engage with us and our students and let us actually see what they're doing, welcoming us into their offices. Like there's never been kind of any secrecy or, because I do think ultimately they are interested in actually improving their programming.
In terms of the organizational culture, I think BRAC had an internal research department long before that was a thing, like way before that was a thing. 1976.
We have -1 minute, so I just want to add something though. To what extent do you think it's because BRAC can afford to accept failure? Because I'm thinking about many other organizations that are much smaller and heavily rely on philanthropy and foundations for funding. And so they need a rubber stamp that the program works in order to fundraise. So they're not that open to the idea that maybe their stuff is not working so well. To what extent do you think that BRAC can afford to learn the truth and to put it out there because they're not as dependent on, there's a part of the income for the organization, if I understand correctly, that actually comes from from BRAC itself, from BRAC University, from the Arong shop, from a lot of activities, right? You have your own income generation going on. So that
I would say we don't love it when the programs fail.
No, but you love it because you learn how to make them better.
It can be difficult too sometimes.
Sorry, can I jump in on this?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't think that's quite true. I think BRAC still depends largely on donor funding for its programmatic work. Of course, it's, you know, it can fund its microfinance work because that's self-sustaining. There are social enterprises that support some of BRAC's work as well. But even beyond that, what I would say, and I think Scott's mentioned this briefly, I mean, BRAC didn't start doing research and being open to critique once it became quite financially stable. As Scott mentioned, we set up our internal research and evaluation division in 1975, and the organization was 3 years old. And the idea wasn't that we're trying to, and this is research and evaluation, this is not monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So this is actually, you know, qualitative and quantitative research on programs, on things we were doing. The one thing, even to your previous question, I think the idea is not that we're working with academics and universities because we want to have nice, you know, reports that tell the world how great our work is and gets us more funding. Obviously, if that happens, fantastic. We're not going to fight with that. But the whole idea of these partnerships from the very beginning were about understanding what we were doing and what was working and what was not working. So we pride ourselves in the fact that we are a learning organization. We want to learn, we want to know what's going well and what's not going well, and we want to improve. And we think that the reason that donors want to fund us is because we are continuously trying to improve. And we don't necessarily have all the answers, but we're always in search for the answers. So I think for us, it's actually worked well having these partnerships with outside organizations and universities, having our own research and evaluation. We even set up our own university. And the university also does a lot of research on BRAC's programs, especially in public health, in education, in governance and development. So, you know, no, I don't take that question as being, you know, now that we're well established, we can be open and honest, and we couldn't be when we were young and not so established. I think this whole element of BRAC's work got us to where we are today, and I don't think it would have happened any other way.
Can I also just add one thing? Sorry, and then do we have to go?
Okay.
It's just that there is also, I want to say there's sort of an expectation when you're that as researchers, we also collaborate, right, with the BRAC researchers that are in country and with their sort of research organization. And so, and in that way too, I think there's this two-way learning. We're often, you know, we're also sort of helping them learn how to become better researchers while we're all, you know, we're learning about the program. And I've found that a very unique relationship with sort of their research organization as well.
All right. Oops, we are, sorry, I see there's still some hands up, but we are 6 minutes behind schedule, so I'm told we need to wrap up. Sorry, for those who couldn't ask their questions, maybe you guys can stick around for a few minutes after for people to come here and ask their questions. But thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sharon, for being with us, and everybody for being here.